just
Oh,
a
sweet.
thing.
Oh, cool. All right. And like I said, I'll only be able to do
Of course,
coherently probably about 10, 15 minutes
of
before
course.
I get tired.
I understand. I totally get it. But I wanted to get your thoughts on the book on the show, if possible, to have something good to clip and be able to really get it out there, because I don't know how many people are even aware of this yet. So thank you. And folks, good morning. This is the Eclectic Radical. I'm Chris Richards, the Eclectic Radical, as always. With me today is my co-host, Youri Smouter of the 1+1 program on YouTube. And it is my great pleasure to, after years of following him on Twitter, to have Leslie Lee III of Struggle Session on my show. Welcome, Leslie.
Hey, how's it going? I'm honored to be here. Of all the Sunday morning talk news shows, the Meet the Presses, I think this is my favorite one to come on by far.
Well, every single one of my guests has said the same thing, but I don't know if any of them have actually been on Meet the Press. So, but I appreciate it all the same.
Should be called, though. It should be called Meet the Press, the popular corporate news outlet. Should be called Meet the Windbags, who are going to set the agenda for the entire week.
Well,
it's actually funny. It's actually funny because it wasn't Meet the Press. It was the one on CBS. I just saw the intro for it.
Yes.
And they tried to do it like, I guess they changed up the format. So it was a little bit more like Sunday morning, where it was supposed to be positive news. But all of the news is so horrific that like they really like it was a complete tonal mismatch. Like at the end, she actually said all that and more, when in like the list of all of the Trump actions and shutting this down. And like they were actually talking about supposed to be talking about, strangely enough, the NIH being defunded and shut down, and that sort of thing. So that's like was their laundry list of things to go through, and they couldn't, but they hadn't changed their tone at all with their delivery or their script.
Well, and I'll try not to laugh too much, but it's going to be hard considering that the book we're talking about is a joke.
Yes.
For those who aren't familiar with it, I hate to actually give the title of the book on the air because I don't want people to buy it by mistake, but I have to. It's called In COVID's Wake. It's awful, and it sets the tone right in the acknowledgments by giving a call out to our new NIH director, since you mentioned the NIH, Jay Bhattacharya, who is technically an MD, but as I was telling Youri before we went off the air, it's a very technical sort of MD where he's an economist who got an MD so he could understand medical language for the purpose of compiling economic data. He's not someone who has ever practiced or has ever worked in an actual public health environment. Jay Bhattacharya's job is to determine how us getting sick affects the economy. And he's the guy they're saying, this is our policy guy for this book.
Yeah, and it even starts before they give him that shout out. It starts with the title of the book.
That's true.
In COVID's Wake. I said on Twitter, is like, if a nonfiction book, if the title is a lie, it's already a problem, because COVID, COVID's still here. The wake has not gotten here at all yet, so even the title of the book, In COVID's Wake, and we're seeing, not to get a little bit off topic, but Vox put out a piece just yesterday with a similar theme. It's like America and the media needs a COVID reckoning. There's been all these, after the 5-year anniversary, quote unquote, of when the pandemic started, there's all these pieces of people saying we need to look back on the pandemic, ignoring that it's still going on. And they always all the look backs invariably are saying that we did far too much. We reacted too much. We did too much to stop this virus, this pandemic that is still ongoing. Like, invariably, it's bizarre. And this book is a part of that push.
There's a sort of anti-rational logic to it if you understand how people think. It's this really flattened binary in which the only possible choices, because herd immunity is the only thing that will ever save us from anything. So the only possible choices are a perfect vaccine that gives you everybody herd immunity immediately so no one ever gets sick, or let it rip so everyone gets sick and we get herd immunity as fast as possible. Yes. And those really seem to be the only possible choices in their brains.
Yeah, it's Hollywood thinking. I actually moved at the start of the pandemic, right? People were talking about pandemic movies and movies about viruses. And when you look back, you realize all of those movies lie to you because they tell you that a virus, whatever virus it's going to be, it's going to affect every single person the exact same way with low variability. It's not going to mutate or change, except for in the Resident Evil movie series. Actually, it does mutate. I have to give Paul W.S. Anderson credit for that. And also that when the cure comes, when that vaccine comes, that's it. The movie ends. Find me a pandemic movie that does not end with them finding even the first inklings of what a vaccine might be. Even the Mega Man, they just get his blood at the end of the movie, and it's like, oh, what? Movie's over. Society's, saved or whatever.
And in fact, I think. Well, the funny thing about the pandemic, two things to add to that. The funny thing about the pandemic was like other pandemics that have happened, a lot of people were completely falling asleep at the wheel, and the response is, this is just some stupid thing that happens in China. You know how tropical diseases only happen to those yellow and black people over there and so forth. And then the avalanche kept coming, and then the response was, well, herd immunity. But it was herd immunity it was that line of thinking which actually made the shit hit the fan to have the pandemic. And then the response of the pandemic wasn't, the response to the pandemic should have been the following. It should have been, okay, guys, this is a real deadly disease. Yes, it's going to affect everybody differently, but this is a real pandemic. And of course, people can make their criticisms. I think there were legitimate criticisms about lockdowns and whatnot. But the fact of the matter is this:
I have to stop you. I hate to break in, but the only legitimate criticisms that I can think of lockdowns is that we didn't really have any. Lockdown. I know you're in Europe. I know you're in Europe, and it's a little different. But here in the U.S., we had a lot of talk about lockdowns, but no actual lockdowns. You have to understand that essential worker was used so loosely in the United States that Hollywood was still operating because Gavin Newsom said that Hollywood was an essential industry during
pro wrestling in Florida. Yes, able to keep operating because the governor's a pro wrestling fan.
But that being said, what I mean about the legitimate criticisms about lockdowns, it's not that lockdowns weren't an effective way to contain and even eradicate the pandemic. It's that we should have had a people's bailout.
Yes, we should have.
So instead of letting small businesses, bars, clubs, and whatnot go bankrupt, bail the people out, give people a universal basic income to stay at home, give everyone the proper treatment they needed. It should have been the moment that everybody unanimously, if you're on the left, that is, should have been screaming for single payer healthcare, single payer healthcare, single payer healthcare. Because we didn't have that. The COVID minimalists and denialists weaponized that. The idlibs, the idiot libertarians, weaponized that to be like, oh, COVID is a hoax and this is a pandemic, scamdemic.
At one point, we had that brief moment where Kamala Harris was co-sponsoring a universal basic income bill.
Yeah.
Now that's gone. Nobody's ever talked about that again.
And the fact is, we'll still, it's like the problem has not gone away. Again, going back to the book called In COVID's Wake, the second big issue I found with this book when I acquired it from the Genesis library, I looked for how many times they mentioned long COVID, because when you look at long COVID and the fact that the low estimate is that 400 million people worldwide have this. We're seeing when you read read the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, not New York Times, the financial papers,
Financial Times, Bloomberg,
when they're
all the business news.
They're talking about billions, trillions of dollars lost from the economy because so many people have been because of long COVID and the after effects of that. So I would think this book, called In COVID's Wake, would focus on long COVID because it's a big issue. And you could write a whole book about it. There's been 400,000 studies on it, and there's been so little action. You would think they would write extensively about this in this book. There is one page, 1.2 being generous, pages on it, 5 paragraphs, a 5-paragraph essay, like a middle schooler would write, basically summing, but also minimizing long COVID in a way that makes it seem like it's not that big a deal, when it's going to be the biggest deal. It's the biggest. I think long COVID is going to change humanity if we do not get a hold of it or do something about COVID and the ongoing issue of spreading this deadly and disabling virus. If everybody keeps catching it, like, what does that world end up looking like?
You mentioned the Omega Man. The Omega Man is one of several attempts to adapt Richard Matheson's novel I Am Legend for the screen.
Yes.
And of course, in I Am Legend, the virus completely changes the world forever in unmistakable ways. And Omega Man is perhaps the worst of the several adaptations of that book when it comes to the accuracy of the storyline.
Yes. In Vincent Price's, the first one, The Last Man, it's called The Last Man on Earth. It shows how, all these people who have, like, they're not zombies. They do still have, like, mental awareness. They form their own society, the people who have been infected. You can look in the book in a lot of different ways as far as thematically goes, but the point more is, like, the idea that the virus, that we can just keep continuing infecting ourselves with this virus, it's doing damage to our brains, our bodies, that's going to have a cascading effect on everything we experience. And we're seeing it in the data. We're seeing what the call outs for students are like, and teachers in the US and the UK and Japan, multiple countries, multiple societies. A lot of people like to suggest, as they downplayed the AIDS virus in the 80s, AIDS in the 80s, they said this is long COVID is only something that, poor people get, Black people get, women get,
disabled people,
disabled people who are already sick, people who are already mentally ill. And it's just a completely ridiculous thing when you look at the statistics about, disability in all these countries. Look at all these studies. Like, people like to crack jokes because there was a study that showed that, bisexual people, or I think maybe transgender people, were more likely to have long COVID based on, a self-reported survey. And there's plenty of rational reasons for that, like, for example, the type of jobs they might have, which
economic marginalization makes you more vulnerable.
Yes, but someone posted it, and then I showed how that for people like to crack jokes, oh, these are just bisexuals with all these fake illnesses. So I showed a study of a small village in India, which showed a higher long COVID rate than these, hipster, liberal, purple hair, lazy baristas that you're making fun of over here. Like, it is a global problem, and it's actually, we in the West are very privileged because we actually have access to things like N95 masks that block transmission of COVID, while people in the global South are putting on cloth masks still to try and protect themselves.
I've seen some remarkably supportive replies to people in the long COVID community asking people to mask, from people in the Palestinian community saying, hey, yeah, please, we can't even get masks in Gaza. You have the chance to mask. You should be masking.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, I feel like one disconnect is, and one thing that this book, doesn't talk about, is like, COVID is spread by people, by you, by me. it doesn't just happen. It's not just a thing that just passively is in the air. It is airborne, which is another fight, which strangely enough, that is still ongoing. Like, we still cannot get all our governments to admit that this virus is airborne, because it has implications about liability.
I hate to jump off too much. There's a whole medical controversy, and has been for years, over what aerosol transmission actually means, and this whole argument between droplet theory versus airborne. And this has been going on for so many years that lots of doctors don't even have a clear understanding of airborne transmission, because of the ways that the topic has been confused by people who essentially don't want to have to ever take responsibility.
Yes, because as soon as you say it's airborne, like, and it's strange because in the Hollywood movies, that is the version of the virus. I think if you ask most like normal, regular folks, when they say airborne, they mean like in the air. But but then they hear a doctor say, no, we just mean a droplet. Then that kind of makes them, doubt what they know. But no, the virus is spread through the air, just like in the movies. That is one part where the movies get it right. And you can, and and that means, and when you say that, that changes how society has to operate. We need to think about air quality seriously, and the reasons our governments and our corporations don't want us to do it is because it would be expensive, and like they would have to provide things and support and services and take care of people, and they have decided that, and I think it's a suicidal decision on their own part, because the elites are getting sick too. Make no mistake, there's a reason why Elon Musk is mainlining ketamine constantly, even before he's going to be on cameras. Okay, like, it's one thing to use it, but it's like allegedly. One thing, if in this comedy skit, allegedly Elon Musk may be mainlining ketamine to deal with the fact that he's had COVID several times, and as many of our elites have, So it's like they're all getting sick too. They don't have a cure for long COVID either. Brian Johnson, that billionaire who's trying to live forever, he actually admits, like, he got COVID, it wrecked his lungs, and there's nothing he can do about it. So
David,
it's Brian Johnson. He's the guy. Yeah. He's the guy who was draining the blood from his son, grandson.
The guy who wants to live forever.
Yeah, the guy who wants to live forever. Even he admits, is like, well, I messed up with COVID. I can't let myself catch COVID. But the reason, like, it's a suicidal choice. Like, capitalism in general is a suicidal choice. Like, people should just question, like, why do you have the say? Like, do you think that? I just want people to ask themselves this. Do you think Trump right now, his COVID policy is good? Do you think it just not even, you don't even have to think about what the policy is. Whatever you think Trump's policy would be, do you think that would be a good policy? Because that's the policy we have right now. Okay. Like, if everything else that he's doing is broken and breaking things, why wouldn't this be, as well as not just to focus on Trump, but like, I feel like people can understand at least that it's like, if Biden and Trump and every corporation all agree on one thing, is probably a bad thing. If the, like, I think that's just,
If it wasn't two questions. Number one, Leslie, can you explain to our audience your own COVID experience and what what you've been struggling with when it comes to long-term COVID? And wasn't the U.S. response the following? I think most Western countries also had the same response. But wasn't the U.S. response basically that when everybody did acknowledge that this is a very serious pandemic, Donald Trump, instead of going to his far-right reactionary base and say to them, guys, this is a very serious disease. This is a pandemic, so please mask up. Please take precaution. Please stay at home. And yes, we're going to do lockdowns, but don't worry, I'm going to bail you guys out. The fact that he didn't do that, and then he allowed the red states, the reactionary red states, to do this thing where if you believe COVID is real, you must be a Biden Stalinist piece of shit, and if you think that the pandemic is just a scam and so forth, or that it's just like the flu, that it became this, this thing where blue states, even though they didn't really do actual lockdowns, some would do lockdowns, but then if you were in the red state, I know a friend of mine who lives in Arizona said that it was terrible because everybody was an anti-masker and everybody was just saying no, COVID is a hoax and whatnot.
Well, I'll take the second questions first because it was like a mix, right? Like it was that, but it was also like Trump, his COVID response, ultimately, he had more mitigations than Biden did, at the end of his run. And, after Biden decided it was, the pandemic was over, So, I've said this before, I'm losing a little bit energy here, but I've compared it before. It's like when you look at the COVID responses, if you just were adding up, like Trump's on the whole was terrible, but it was better than Biden's on the whole. Many of those people protesting the vaccine, talking about the vaccine, they got vaccinated. Like 70, 80% of adults got that first round of vaccinations. And then when you look at Biden, last summer, we're not getting, the vaccines were delayed for months and barely anybody got them. So more people were getting vaccinated under Trump at certain times than certainly towards the end of Biden or even now. Like people have not kept up with their vaccines. Like it's such a strange thing. Like everything you said about Trump's terrible response and how he politicized it in a terrible way is true. But also, like he did he did give people money. He did make cut checks, Biden stopped that and sent less money. So it's like this bizarre, like contradictory status. It really makes no sense.
He went out of his way to make a deal with congressional Republicans to end all the COVID policies that were passed under Trump.
Yes, and it makes no sense because those policies were working.
Yes.
Like they were working. Like people. And we did not, and like you said, like I feel like a lot of the talk about the lockdowns and schools were closed and a lot of people didn't like having to be around their brats all day and be mean about it as I like. And there was also a lot of people in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles, in these liberal cities who are online all the time anyway. And they complained and couldn't go to restaurants and bars, which is the entire defining point of their experience. Why else would you live in one of those cities unless you were going to a bar or a club 2 or 3 times a week? And so the lockdown, quote unquote, was very hard for them because there were specific lockdowns, like in Los Angeles, on restaurants that did last for months and months and months. So when you hear people talking about like their PTSD from the lockdown, like first of all, my life before the lockdown, I wasn't going to a restaurant that often, and like if I was living that life, like that would be a big change for me. And if it was extended, that would be a big problem. But that's not the life that most people live, and I feel like that's been the narrative that's taken over.
I'm actually surprised by how many people in the progressive space have a livelihood that revolves around bars in some way.
Oh, and a lot work there. And I can give space. I can give space for, the waiters and, the staffers. Like I understand.
Sure.
Like that sucks to be in that position. And certainly you get a lot of pressure if you're a waiter, so if you're a female waiter, especially you're like wearing a mask. That's a hard row to hoe, but like we still have to accept what reality is. Like we can't lie to ourselves. Even like I never have an issue with someone who says like I can't wear a mask. I'm sorry, I know it's the right thing to do. I can't do it. That's understandable. A lot of people are in that position. There's lots of people with disabilities, they can't wear masks, for perfectly reasons, any sort of thing. But the pushback from people, when you say like this is the right thing to do and we all should do it, there should be no pushback from that from any reasonable person. Even if you can't do it, even if you're in a bad situation, you should still understand like, all right, that's still the right thing to do. I can't do it, but hey, rock on.
I'll tell you something interesting. I mean, my own experience is I mean, I have a very unique situation in that I've not been able to find a job because I live in the country where you have to speak French or Flemish in order to get a job and so forth. I'm based in southern Belgium, very small place called Villers-la-Ville, where if you have lockdowns, it's not going to really badly impact people that much since it's a very small town, and some convenience stores, shopping places will be open and so forth. So Villers, it wasn't a problem to lock down that place. Now, because I've been chronically unemployed, I mean, what I do, which is interviewing people on the internet and so forth like that, for me, it wasn't scary, the idea of a 6-month lockdown or anything like that. When other people were saying to me, what am I going to do for 6 months locked at home? I was like, guys, that's literally like my whole life. So
I feel like people were like fine with that for the most part until the social pressure came when the conservatives and the right wing started having their events and started putting on their pro wrestling shows, and then people started to miss out. People talk often about how we all felt united together. Now the Gal Gadot Imagine video, that wasn't the type of unity we wanted, but we were united in hating that, right? Like everybody was on board with that. Like we were sick of celebrities. This lockdown sucks, but we're going to do it together because this virus is killing people we care about, and that has been completely lost. The book,
I hate to give
the book doesn't barely talk about it. Yeah.
I hate to give corporate America credit, and I realize things have changed now, and maybe it wasn't as great as it sounded, but they were working within the science they were aware of at the time. Oscar Mayer did that thing. Yeah, go out in your front yard and barbecue by yourself where your neighbors can see you, and social distance together, and do the solidarity thing, but without spreading it around.
It's so hard because even like the social distancing thing, because that's something conservatives talk about a lot because it was bullshit, and it was bullshit because it was airborne, because it was airborne. So that just makes it. So when people hear that the social distancing was bullshit, they say, "Oh, well, then we need to take no precautions." It's no, we should have taken more. We should have been wearing respirators instead of being told, as everyone was told initially, that masks would do nothing, masks wouldn't help. Which ridiculous. But when you look at the history of like the government and the CDC and all of the governments and how they handle viruses, it takes them years to get anything right. I have a screenshot of an article right now where it's like from the CDC that said, it looks like most people who gets the AIDS virus, before it was called HIV, most people who get the AIDS virus don't develop AIDS. 2/3 of gay men 5 years in, they're fine. That's the moment we're in right now. That is us right now. We're in the 2/3 of gay men are fine after catching HIV moment, and it's a scary moment to be in, but it's a lot easier if we're just more honest about it. And books like this don't help at all.
Honestly, the book about pandemics that people should be reading to understand the government response is The Stand.
Yes. The Stand's a good one. I was trying to think there's another one. There's a TV show. I'm losing the name.
Well, The Walking Dead. The Walking Dead is the perfect pandemic show for COVID-19.
Oh, there's actually even better one. Not to knock The Walking Dead, but Black Summer. Because it starts in this moment where we're still going to work, but pretending that the virus isn't kind of taking over our lives, where we're just you hear about this or that zombie attack and this or that province and this or that place, but we still gotta go to work, we still got bills to pay, we still got mortgages, and we're still going. And then you slowly see the society collapse and people are in the shit, and you're just one day driving to work, and then you get.
Here's an interesting confession. I would love your response to this, Leslie. Now, when the pandemic happened, I'll admit I was very ignorant about what a pandemic was and how a pandemic spreads and stuff like that. And there was a period of time, and if you even watch some of my episodes on 1+1 where I ask about how is your government responding to COVID and stuff like that, there was a period of time where I almost was like a COVID not a COVID denialist, but definitely a COVID minimalist and so forth.
Everybody was there. Almost everybody's been there.
And the reason why I was very much a COVID minimalist and almost became like an anti-vax extremist was because a lot of left-leaning websites I was reading and so forth were engaging in that. So globalresearch.ca, Last American Vagabond, to a degree, Unlimited Hangouts and and other outlets were all.
And all your George Galloways and Jimmy Dores were going into the COVID denial.
Yeah, and I'll give all those, because first of all, right? So you have to understand we live.
Oh, sorry.
I was just gonna say, like, it's perfectly understandable for the left to be skeptical of big pharma and government control, right? Like, it makes sense, right? It's just like you have to also look at the particulars. But the problem is, of course, is like our government did do a terrible job and lied. Big pharma did do a terrible job and lied. The vaccine, they did exaggerate the effectiveness, and I don't know if I want to say they exaggerate the safety of it, but the vaccine injury is a real thing that happens. And people don't acknowledge that enough. That isn't the cause of most long COVID by far. And I still would recommend, and there are better vaccines. People criticize the mRNA vaccines, but the Novavax vaccine is more of a traditional vaccine, less side effects. I highly recommend that. Like, where is that middle ground for those skeptics? I think those skeptics need to also come to reality too.
And there's a serious question to be had for because the science behind the mRNA vaccine is based on the theory, well, we're not even going to use the whole virus because we want to make this safer. And for 90% of the people, it is safer. But there's also real questions about who should be having what vaccine and why. And we're not having those conversations.
Yeah, we can't, because it's all hard one way or hard the other way. And it's like, no, there's nuanced conversations that need to be had for medical safety and medical reasons. And it's a lot, and it hurts, and it really hurts I feel like the pro-vaccine stance has gone too far, because most of those people are no longer vaccinated. They got vaccinated 2 or 3 years ago. They thought they were bulletproof, and they're not keeping up with their vaccines, which they should be. They don't understand that being vaccinated does not stop transmission.
The vaccine relax was a deliberate abandonment of all the excellent Swiss cheese messaging they had been doing up until that point.
Swiss cheese is the best. That's the best we can do. And if you stick with that messaging, that's fine. But if you go on Rachel Maddow and tell people that, which happened, that if you get vaccinated, you cannot spread the virus, and that turns out not to be the case, they're either going to turn on you or just tune you out, or continue to believe it in spite of all the evidence. Otherwise, there are people who have caught COVID multiple times who still think that because they're vaccinated, they're protected from catching COVID. And
it must have been the flu.
Exactly. But I think I woke up to, okay, this is a very serious pandemic, get yourself vaccinated and so forth. I think I woke up to that coffee when basically, I kept hearing commentators every now and then, and people in other left-leaning spaces compare this pandemic to the Spanish influenza pandemic. And when I started to watch documentaries about that, and read about that, and read about how there were anti-mask people back then, that's when I realized, okay, this is history repeating itself.
I'm gonna blow your mind. I'm going to blow your mind. The reason the flu still exists now is because they gave up on lockdowns for the flu in 1920.
Yeah, exactly.
If people had a zero flu attitude, we might not have the flu now.
Yes. And that's the thing. This virus mutates, and another thing about the Spanish flu, a misnomer. Spain was just the country that acknowledged it was happening. That's why it's called the Spanish flu.
Exactly.
By the way, another parallel.
It started in France with veterans. It was called the Spanish flu to fool people.
and you see in the decades after it ended, quote unquote, a sleeping sickness that takes over people where they can't function and are suddenly disabled. And obviously we're not tracking it well now, but certainly back then.
There's a famous movie about those patients with Robin Williams and Robert De Niro.
Oh yes.
Awakenings, very good film.
That's what that's about. It is also centrally referenced in the first storyline of the Sandman comics back in the 80s.
Yes, I remember that now. I remember that. Well, I can't really recommend people read Sandman now, but yes.
I recognize people. I recommend people download it for free so he doesn't get any money, because the art is the product is good and people should consume the product, but they should make sure the creator does not get paid.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
he's a far-right douchebag, or
because he's a rapist.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And sadly, as comic creators go, his politics are some of the less offensive. He's just an ordinary liberal.
Yes.
It's the rape.
But that being said, Leslie, do you think that if COVID, I mean, obviously, if you're one of those unlucky people that got a really bad COVID and and it's crippled you, and now you're struggling with long COVID, but do you think if the symptoms of COVID were as grotesque as the Spanish flu, the Spanish influenza symptoms, more people would have taken this pandemic seriously and just got themselves vaccinated, even if they have a healthy mistrust of the evil big pharma and whatnot?
Well, here's the thing. It's not a horrible COVID that causes long COVID. It's just COVID. You can have an asymptomatic case and get COVID. It's about the virus getting into your body. If you are asymptomatic, and the majority of transmissions are from asymptomatic infections. That means you get COVID and you don't feel it, and then you spread it on to other people because you don't know you're sick. You're just breathing in. That's how most infections happen. So that's kind of the stealth aspect of the virus. But you can get long COVID from one of those cases. It doesn't matter, because a lot of times asymptomatic can also mean that it has bypassed your immune system. Okay. The virus is not sneezing. It's not coughing. That's your body trying to expel it. If you get the virus and your body is not trying to expel it, that may be a serious problem that you will not know about or not realize until months, years later. People know when it comes to HIV/AIDS, you don't die from AIDS, you die from something else. The complications, and that's happening to people right now. We're seeing it happen with celebrities. So and it's not about luck. It's really about, like, how many times do you catch the virus? Because eventually you are going to get long COVID if you keep catching COVID. And I feel like a lot of people think that, like, they catch it once and whatever that's a movie thing again. Like, you catch you get bitten by the zombie, you miraculously survive, you're immune. Not how COVID works. That what if the second time or the third time, then you turn into a zombie? Okay, that's how COVID works. So you like a lot of people, like, you have to change the way you think. And like you pointed out earlier, like, it on a societal level, that means that yes, you need to do a lockdown where you're paying people to stay home, because this virus cannot keep spreading. Because if it keeps spreading, more and more people will get sick. More and more people will have illnesses that they don't realize. The brain fog stuff is the stuff that really frightens me, because people have heard of CTE, right? What professional wrestlers, NFL players, boxers, a lot of them who end up, having mental health issues that are very severe. Some, number of which, and I want to be careful how I'm saying this, but a number of which have murdered people after.
I'll tell you what scares
after their
me.
brain damage. And this is something that's happened to everyone every time on a certain level. Every time they get COVID, you're getting a certain level of brain damage.
Yeah. What scares me, there's when I think about brain fog, like I said, I've written about boxing. I'm a fan. I know a lot about pugilistic and dementia. And I remember the guy who was found by a fan in Florida living on food stamps in a house with no electricity all by himself. And they helped, and his fans had to raise a collection to help get him into a retirement home. And he's been living in the retirement home ever since. And I think to myself, I don't have those kinds of fans.
Yeah, that's the other thing. It's like, that's why you're seeing the huge talk of benefits cuts in the UK.
Yeah.
And I want to be very clear, when I mentioned the murder stuff, that's not the majority of people. Most of us will be dealing with this aspect of it, where we're going to have our benefit. We're not going to be able to work, and there's not going to be benefits to take care of us, and there's not going to be anybody to help because everybody else is going through the same thing at the same time. That's another reason why, particularly on the left, this is an important thing to think about, because right now, this is most affecting the people who can least afford it to affect them. But this can take out anybody, though. Doctors, lawyers, shutting down their practices. I've lost 2 doctors in the past, 6 months because of long COVID.
That being said, Leslie, what do you say to those on the left who sincerely, rightly or wrongly, but they sincerely believe that the vaccine is the most dangerous thing that you can inject into your body, and of course they'll use, there are many examples of people who have been injured by the vaccine. So what do you say to those who say that we're the ones that are being ableist and so forth, making people take a vaccine that can injure them, when in reality, the COVID minimalists and denialists, I have to say, they're the ones who have been infected with libertarianism and the whole "my body, my choice" and stuff like that. So I'm curious. So what would be your response to the Jimmy Dores of the world, the RFK Juniors of the world, who say that the vaccine is much more dangerous than COVID itself?
All right. Well, the first thing I'll say is, the real legit thing is, all right, then wear a respirator. If you do not want to get vaccinated, wear a respirator to stop the spread of the virus, because that still is dangerous. It's still dangerous to other people. Now, when it comes to, if I'm really trying to get them into the vaccine for whatever reason, and I don't spend a lot of time doing this, because respirator is the first line of defense, is more effective. Yep. If everybody was wearing respirators, that's more effective than the vaccines that we currently have, at least the mRNA ones that we currently have. Novavax, if you are anti-vaccine, look into Novavax. Okay, the Novavax one is different. It's different. It has less side effects. I would recommend that. Even people who are generally wary of the vaccine but aren't hardline, I would, anybody getting the vaccine, I would tell them, look into Novavax, try to get Novavax.
If you hate Pfizer, you should support Novavax, just because Pfizer keeps trying to mess with their FDA approval.
Oh yes, if you're into the quote unquote, if you like to get into the deep state, ask why Novavax is constantly delayed. Ask why you can't get it in Canada. Even though it's safer and more effective. Just look like that. If you're looking for the strings, pull on that string. See why is Novavax being held back in favor of the other vaccines? Like, if you want to find, you can be as skeptical as you want, but still take rational COVID precautions that everybody has to take. All of us have to be in this together. The main thing is, nothing has changed from when we were all masking and 80% of the Trump voters were getting vaccinated. Like, nothing has changed since then as far as the dangers of the virus. And I think the more people have learned about how the government has mishandled things, has just confused the issue, and people just get tired of it. but it's not going away. Like, it's still here. And the sooner we admit it's a problem, the faster we can do the better it will be down the line. The less damage we'll have done to ourselves down the line, just like climate change.
I think that also goes to show you how much libertarianism has completely rotted the minds of not just Americans, but I think people globally in the whole. Because I mean, this is the first pandemic. Let's be honest. This is literally the first pandemic where the response of most people who I guess don't spend a lot of time with people who are disabled, and if it's not if somebody who doesn't have severe COVID, if it's not happening to them, they won't wake up and smell the coffee. This is the first pandemic where literally the response of a lot of people was, I don't give a shit. I want to continue to live my life as it was before a pandemic. That's just mind-boggling.
And it's so phony too, because I see what their lives are like. I go out, I have to leave the house as much, if not more, than before. I see what the grocery prices are like. I see them whack ass concerts that you have to pay $300 for nosebleed seats to see a pop singer. Are you kidding me? Are you serious? Ain't no scenes. Ain't nothing out there that's worth doing. I see you and your 100,000 posts living in Brooklyn. It's not that exciting, that life you're leading. And even still, you could live your life with a respirator on and not in other people's lives or your own too, because we have gotten to the point where everybody's kind of admitting that everyone is sick all the time. Even people who don't want to talk about COVID. Oh yeah, I have an immune disease. Oh, actually, when that report came out, maybe about a month ago, talking about vaccine damage, that gave every conservative permission to admit that long COVID is real, because they say, "Oh, I was injured by the vaccine." So more and more people are admitting, no, that's the wrong response, and but
Jimmy Dore's been saying long COVID. I got long COVID from the vaccine for a very long time, while at the same time not taking long COVID seriously, which I don't get.
We don't have to do it. We don't have to do it. Like when you first asked me this question, it's like, I don't have to fight with someone about the vaccine, because ultimately the respirator is more effective. Yeah. What's your argument against that? What is the rational argument against like that? Then let's go there, because there really isn't one. Like and if we all, and people always, really the only argument they make is, well, you want to wear masks forever? No, I want to wear masks until COVID is done. There are numbers we can get to, like even Fauci. Like if we get to 10,000 cases, he will feel the pandemic is over. I don't know how accurate that would be, but we haven't gotten anywhere near to that point. Let's try it.
But for me, even the whole anti-mask stupidity. Okay, yes, hospital masks aren't always effective, but so is not wearing a condom. Like, you can still wear a condom, have sex, and accidents can happen. But better to be safe than sorry, right?
Yeah, and let's break this down I'll break it down really quickly, because you also see a lot of people liberals on the left kind of saying, well, they were just wearing baggy masks on their nose. It was useless. Like, no, that still helps a little bit. Like, studies have shown even bad mask wearing,
anything is better than nothing.
Anything is better than nothing. A cloth mask is better than nothing. But also they don't acknowledge this. An N95 is pretty much perfect if two people are wearing it at stopping transmission, wearing it properly. Even if you're not wearing your N95 properly, you haven't gotten it fit tested, this is a complicated issue. It's better than nothing. It's always going to be better than nothing to have something on your face. And like, we can all get down with that. We can all, and obviously, 50 people in a room of 100 people mass is better than nothing. Like, but 100 would be better. But if like any event you want to have, you can have and try to make things better and stop transmission. And the way this virus spreads, asymptomatically, silently, without people knowing. Like, you don't know when you put on that mask may save dozens of lives. Stop dozens of people from being disabled. You don't know, so wear it. Wear it just in case.
I want to circle back for a moment, Youri. Leslie, how are you feeling? You promised us 15 minutes,
yes,
and you've given us 50, so I want to ask.
I do gotta tap out. But thank you so much, Chris, Youri. So wonderful meeting you and talking with you. Hopefully we can do this again. I really appreciate it. Check us out. That show. Have a good one. Peace.
Thanks for coming on. You have a great week.
Yeah, it is unbelievable, and I think my other problem with the whole COVID minimalists, and I still distinguish them from COVID denialists, but my whole problem even with the COVID minimalist people is that, okay, it's one thing if you don't take COVID seriously, but when you're actively engaging in anti-lockdown protests, anti-mask protests, and then with the anti-vax extremists, for me, well, then you're more or less the same as a COVID denialist, and fuck those guys. And I know I have friends who also were COVID minimalists and anti-vax extremists, but jeez, I just can't get into that.
Ultimately, what it comes down to, and I'm going to be really, really direct about it because I don't think we deal with it enough. People hate disabled people. And I use the word hate on purpose. People don't think of it that way, but they do. People hate disabled people on the same sort of scale that people hate black people. And it's not talked about.
Actually, talk a bit more about that for our audience.
I'll give a really good example because it factors into so many of the ways we talk about healthy people. So when Bernie fell down during the 2020 primaries and hit his head, he had a minor cardiac event. And he had fallen down in the shower and he needed stitches. And it was reported on as if he was unfit to be president because he might die at any minute. When Hillary Clinton fainted in the 2016, now there are lots of reasons to hate Hillary Clinton, but think about this for a moment. When Hillary Clinton fainted in the 2016 election, the fact that she fainted in public, which is something that people have been known to do, and is something specifically that older women have been known to do as they age. There used to be fainting couches in wealthy people's houses for just that reason. But this was, she's unfit to be president. You look at the way Ken Klippenstein talks about Democrats with cancer, calling them walking corpses and accusing them of holding on to power even when they know they're dying in a way that makes, dying people shouldn't have power. Like, the bad thing is that they're dying and not that they're corrupt or they don't represent their constituents. And we don't really think about a lot of the ways, but I did a whole show about how society talks about sick people and how we use terms that relate to developmental disability or mental health as these sort of catch-all slurs for people who are stupid and or irrational and or evil. Yes, this is true. Corsets certainly did not help, but also POTS isn't new. We just know what to call it now. And when you combine corsets and POTS, things get worse.
Well, in fact, looking back, kind of like what you said about Hillary Clinton, and looking back, there was a bit of a Hillary Clinton derangement syndrome that also existed on the left, like when everybody was getting on Hillary Clinton's case when she said that Donald Trump supporters were a basket of deplorables. No, it's only half of them.
I think people should not have been. People tried to make that into something it wasn't. People tried to make Hillary Clinton saying that Donald Trump supporters were deplorable because they were somehow working class poor people, when no, exactly. Donald Trump supporters were deplorable because they were Nazis. I didn't have a problem with the deplorables comment. I thought that was one of the few cases of Hillary Clinton saying it like it is. But a lot of people hate the idea of anything that might alienate the working class Trump supporter, as if the working class Trump supporter is the reason Trump won. There's a whole show in that too,
and particularly white working class. On top of that,
well,
if you also look back at John McCain, there's plenty of stuff to criticize John McCain about. He has a basket full of deplorable politics, but a lot of people were engaging in just naked ageism, and it was that kind of ageism which was later used by people who did not want Bernie Sanders to become.
But I would notice that some of the very people who are making noise about the age of Democrats now might have said that John McCain was heroic for going to the Senate despite his cancer and saying no to Trump's repeal of Obamacare. So the way that who people are often impacts the way they are covered. People talked about John McCain's disability a lot as if it meant he was a hero, because he had been disabled as a soldier in a war who was taken prisoner and tortured. So we have to respect his disability. But look at how they treat people with the same disability, but who weren't tortured in a war and just have chronic fatigue syndrome, ME/CFS, something like that.
Well, in fact,
and it's just we hate sick people. Our society says that sick people are being punished for something, and that's why they're sick. And if they're good, God will heal them. And if God doesn't heal them, they kind of deserve what they get. And society programs us to think that way on multiple levels. This is why we constantly see people accusing disabled people of not really being disabled and of faking it.
Wow, yeah, indeed. In fact,
the whole benefits being cut thing in the UK comes back into this, where the idea that somehow it's helping disabled people to cut their benefits so they have to work harder outside their home. How does that actually help them?
If you remember the healthcare debates when Obama was trying to pass his healthcare bill, which was not a single payer healthcare bill, but if you remember when the Tea Party was mobilizing to
death panels
on the Bill Maher show, on Real Time with Bill Maher show, they actually showed a counter protest to the Tea Party, and there was a person with very severe Parkinson's disease, and the Tea Party person did the following: "What, you guys want welfare?" And he would throw a $5 bill at it and says, "We don't want to provide you guys welfare," and so forth. So ableism is a very serious thing. And when people, just blindly off the cuff say things like welfare makes people lazy, and we need to cut people's welfare benefits because some people aren't really, because that's going to make people work and so forth. They don't realize that when a government, like the UK government, which has been brought to a United Nations court a whopping 3 times because their welfare cuts and because their welfare cuts and whatnot were severely impacting the disabled community, This is why we need. This is why us on the left, those who are able-bodied, whatever whatever is the term, need to push back against the anti-welfare arguments, because when you cut welfare, you are disproportionately. You're not only impacting somebody who's having a hard time trying to find a job, but you're disproportionately impacting the disabled community.
Oh, of course. And on top of that, I mean, when you push disabled people back to work when they can't work, you're taking years off their lives, because you're making them impact their health adversely in order to support their existence, and they're going to die faster. Now, keep in mind that that before the Holocaust happened, Nazi Germany started the T4 program, which consisted of, on the one hand, a series of massive cuts to the disability social safety network that the Weimar government under the Social Democrats had instituted. And second, it encouraged disabled people's families to take them to hospitals and have them euthanized.
Yeah.
Now,
all of that all of that strongly influenced by the grotesque eugenics movement of America, which was actually exported into Eastern Europe. And
I'm going to talk about eugenics again in a moment too, but because you look at the T4 program and how that worked, and then you look at the way that the UK and Canada have cut aid to disabled people while passing assisted suicide bills, and you can point to the West's T4 program happening right now.
Wow.
That's just something to think about.
Well, that is something to think about, but it's interesting that you mentioned the...
Now I'm going to take that a step further, because I want to scare you. A man named Joshua Haldeman was arrested in 1940 for his involvement with a Canadian anti-war movement, anti-democratic movement, sort of alternative right-wing political movement called Technocracy Incorporated. The Technocracy movement was big in Canada and the UK and the US for a while in the 30s, and all the people who liked it also kind of liked Hitler and Mussolini. And so in 1940, Jacob Haldeman was arrested by the Canadian authorities for his participation in the Technocracy Incorporated group, and spent some time in prison. In 1950, Jacob Haldeman moved to South Africa because he preferred apartheid to Canada. His daughter, who was born in 1948, May Haldeman, would meet her future husband in Canada, a man named Errol Musk. Elon Musk's maternal grandfather was a Canadian Nazi who moved to South Africa after World War II because he preferred apartheid South Africa to liberal post-World War II Canada.
Which was extremely apartheid, still is to a degree.
He was a pro-apartheid activist in South Africa. So he didn't just go to South Africa from Canada. He went to South Africa from Canada and became a gung-ho apartheid guy because he was a Nazi. And this is Elon Musk's maternal grandfather. And this is also the father of his mother who mostly raised him. So his mother who mostly raised him is a second-generation Canadian Nazi.
Who sometimes has a fake Afrikaner accent in interviews.
Well, it's not fake. She was born in 1948, and the family moved there in 1950. She grew up as an Afrikaner.
Okay. All right. That's interesting. But then what do you say to the people who say that we the pro-vax,
pro-vax. I don't even, the vaccine is almost an irrelevant topic now. I don't care if you're vaxxed or not anymore, and I'll tell you why. Because while the vaccine does reduce your chances to catch it and slightly reduce your chances to spread it, most of what the vaccine does is it makes it less likely that you'll have a symptomatic case. Exactly. But as Leslie said, you don't need to have a symptomatic case to get fucked up.
Yeah.
So if someone is doing proper mitigation, they're running their HVAC to keep the air clean, they're wearing masks, they're not going out in large groups more than they have to, they're not going to the bar and partying all the time. I mean, if people are taking reasonable precautions, it almost doesn't matter if they're vaccinated or not anymore, simply because the vaccines aren't great anyway. The disease is mutated too much. I would love for everybody to be vaccinated, because it would certainly help build up the Swiss cheese strategy better. But if people are doing the other stuff, the vaccine isn't the most important part of the puzzle anymore. The most important part of the puzzle is the N95 respirator.
Well, John Potash, the reason why I keep asking, about the vaccine and the arguments against people like us who are pro-vaccination is I had John Potash, very good journalist, on my program. People can check his work, although I completely disagree with his take on COVID. And he did this big, epic documentary about, the vaccine being dangerous, COVID being pandemic
that's not good.
And stuff like that. And I
didn't know he was into that.
Yeah, and he uses the argument that the people who are behind the vaccine and behind this pandemic, scamdemic stuff, they're the real eugenicists and so forth like that.
Okay, but who are they? Who are they, in his opinion?
Big Pharma wanting to vaccinate us all and so forth.
Okay, so now, so he's an RFK Jr. guy, or is it just the COVID vaccines?
Funny that you mentioned that. He does cite RFK Jr. a lot.
See, there you go. See, you just can't trust people who cite RFK Jr. as a legitimate source. RFK Jr. is working off that the debunked 2000 study by the doctor in England whose work was thrown out by the peer review committee. I mean, about
like vaccines causing like autism or something like that.
Yes, is the vaccine the guy who said vaccines cause autism, and that's the whole thing that RFK Jr. His whole thing is based on that debunked study, and everything else that he says is just selling his shit because he wants people to buy into his crunchy, sort of nature-friendly version of Nazism. But Nazism is what it is. He's openly talked about putting disabled people into work camps so that they'll work hard and get good exercise and won't be disabled anymore.
RFK Jr. is on record saying that.
Oh, yeah.
Fucking hell.
He didn't call them work camps. He called them, we'll put disabled people in nice, comfortable farms where they can get out in nature. But we're talking about a prison work farm.
Also, there's already places which people send their autistic children and so forth. They already send them to places.
Yes, there's already a whole industry to economically exploit autistic people with work. Yes. RFK Jr.'s public health solution is to expand that for all disabled people.
And I mean, the arguments of people who advocated that was that this is a way of helping them get integrated into the community and be whatever meaningful contribution to society, all that fucking bullshit, which just masks.
But no, I appreciate you telling me that, because now I know not to pay any attention at all to Joshua Potash. I did not know that.
The interesting thing was this, because I already from the get-go didn't really agree with the thesis. I did have a very serious conversation with him, and I said some of the following. Okay, what if we did the following? What if we have lockdowns, but we have a people's bailout? If governments and leftists were all advocating that, would you be would you be for it? And he did say yes.
Well, that's good. That's more than RFK Jr.
Exactly.
But that's the whole thing. If he would be, then why the heck is he spreading the anti-vax pandemic bullshit? Because those aren't compatible with each other.
But this is why this is why I still distinguish COVID.
I don't though, but you can't distinguish that.
But there's such an overlap that it's why I just go, okay.
But I mean, that's the thing. When somebody's that far gone that they're talking pandemic, they're vaccinating us on purpose to make us sick. You can't differentiate between different degrees of that. It's all the same thing, and it comes from. And by the way, I should note that Dr. Joshua Haldeman, I keep getting his first name wrong. Dr. Joshua Haldeman was also a chiropractor. And the reason it matters that he was a chiropractor is because chiropractic is part of the whole medicine is bad for you. You need to do this instead. This is what'll make you healthy. And don't worry if somebody else dies. Other people dying just makes you healthier.
And in fact, my other big problem with the whole COVID minimalist / denialist is when I would get into those arguments, which I at some point was just like, guys, I gotta go. Is they all say a version of the following: the people who get COVID and are dying were already sick, so who cares?
And you see, this is going back to this Nazi thing where we hate disabled people. This is what I'm talking about. You see people get back. Well, they're already sick. So why does that matter? Why does it matter if the only people who are dying are already sick? Do you not care about people because they're already sick? You think people who are already sick should die to make more room for you?
Which baffles me when you hear left-leaning people talk about that, because they basically are talking like the very people they want to eradicate to advance single-payer healthcare. It's that logic from the people who want this ridiculous for-profit non-healthcare system that we have and other countries are stupidly adopting, the American model, because that's sort of stupid stuff like pre-existing conditions, so you can't get insurance. That's where all that nonsense comes from. So that's why I was so that's why I was always quite baffled when you hear left-leaning people. We cannot talk about this without mentioning their names. The Jimmy Dores of the world, who all said a version of that.
Yes, no, and it's gross. It's absolutely gross. And what you see is people grabbing onto some of the worst Nazi conspiracy theories and not even realizing what they're repeating. And it's scary. And it's to the point where you have to look at celebrity deaths and read between the lines. Like Michelle Trachtenberg died at 39 years old, a year after she had a liver transplant.
By the way, rest in peace to Michelle Trachtenberg. I loved her in The Spy. I loved her in Buffy, and very, very sad her death. Very sad her death.
Yes. And just a year before, she was telling people she was ready to work again and that she was in good health. But apparently something happened. And, one of the things that having a weakened immune system from something like long COVID affects is whether or not your body accepts an organ and you survive your transplant. Just a thought. She dies a year after having a liver transplant in the age of COVID. There was a Korean TV star and pop star whose celebrity name was Big S, who went on a trip to Japan and got the flu and checked into the hospital because she had a really bad case of the flu and got pneumonia, as people do in the hospital. And then she got a really bad case of pneumonia complication, sepsis, and she died of the sepsis. Now the flu happens, but getting the flu bad enough to go to the hospital is rare if you're not immune compromised, number one. Number two, yes, people get pneumonia in the hospital, but again, if you go by statistics, dying of pneumonia or pneumonia complications is kind of rare still. And then you've got the fact that this was septic pneumonia that killed her extremely fast. And it's like, okay, was her immune system weakened from anything when she got the flu?
Well, let's also let's also tackle head on the whole "it's just like the flu" argument.
Yes,
because funny enough, so I had to I
flu
was
kills people every year. The flu kills people.
So as you know, I was sick earlier this year with bronchitis, and that's stupid of me because I'm a smoker. And when I went to go see my doctor, she's one of the few ones that speaks English, which is why I go to her. And she was wearing her hospital mask, and then I was sort of half joking with her. I was saying, "Is COVID making a comeback?" And she says, "Oh no, it's just no. But the flu is making the comeback." And she didn't just say the flu; she said the I word, influenza.
Yeah.
What was the Spanish flu? It was an influenza virus.
Yes.
So Margaret Kimberly, I remember. I think she said this on the air, or she said this off the air. She said about the COVID denialist and the COVID minimalist that getting the flu is not fun either.
No. So it's a fun fact. People die of the flu every year. In the last 10 years, 25 years or so, 2010 to 2025, on average, people, at least, 10,000 people, sometimes more, die of the flu every year. Over the past 15 years, 2010 to 2025, the year that the fewest number of people died of the flu was 2021 to 2022. The year the most people died of the flu was 2022 to 2023. Now, in 2021 to 2022, people were still masking because of COVID. And that year, only 4,900 people died of the flu. It was the only time in that 15-year period that less than 5,000 people died of the flu. It was, I think, the only time in that 15-year period that less than 10,000 people died of the flu. So when we were all masking for COVID, fewer people died of the flu. And when we stopped masking for COVID, more people died of the flu.
But despite the grotesque capitalist system which does exist in much of Asia, particularly places like Japan and South Korea, the people there, just like China, which, whatever you want to call it, socialism with Chinese characteristics or capitalism with Chinese blah, 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 blah. They all mask up. Year in, year out, most people mask up. It's very common. Nobody ever looks at you like a freak if you wear a hospital mask there. And that, plus a lot of their diets, which does have a lot of vegetables in it, is one of the reasons why, despite capitalism and all the hardships that comes with Chinese socialism, why it's very common that you have people dying at the age of 105 or 115 years old.
We could also argue that bicycles mean they got better exercise than we do. Because bicycling is basic cardio. And if someone doesn't have a disability that would prevent them from doing so, riding your bike is one of the best ways not to die of a heart attack too young.
But if I could ask, but I have to ask you this question because so you talked about the grotesque ableism of Britain, in the U.S. and elsewhere, and how in
Western
Canada,
society in general, I would say, and old people too, because we have the same attitude about old people that we do about disabled people. The idea, well, why don't they just die and get it over with sometimes?
Oh yeah. Ableism and ageism often overlap, but so in Canada, there's been a lot of public outcry. Now, Canada has euthanasia. I am an advocate of euthanasia, but a lot of people have been criticizing Canada's euthanasia because they're making it more and more easier for people who are chronically homeless, chronically depressed, chronically disabled to get it.
Now, the good news is, to the best of my knowledge, the court case from the girl with depression who just basically was suicidal and wanted to kill herself says that being suicidal itself is not a good enough reason to get state assistance in dying. Mm-hmm. But that said, there are all sorts of situations where people are being offered MAID for quality of life issues where they shouldn't be. But the simplest way to put it is, I'm anti-euthanasia. I am pro-assisted suicide and anti-euthanasia.
Pro-assisted suicide but anti-euthanasia. Okay.
Now,
that's interesting.
So euthanasia is the idea of killing somebody to put them out of their misery. And euthanasia is not a decision that the person being euthanized usually makes. When we talk about assisted suicide, we're not talking about euthanasia. Euthanasia, even though they call it medical assistance in dying, the euthanasia laws that exist are about removing disabled people from society. The people who were pushing for MAID in Canada are from the same think tank that passed the euthanasia laws that were passed in Holland. And some of those things, I mean, obviously this isn't something where you can just go to the hospital and have your kid killed. It's not quite like that. But you can have your child euthanized for quality of life issues as old as 12. Mm-hmm. And this is a parental decision, not a consenting decision by the child. Okay. When we're talking about euthanizing children at 1 or 2 or 3, there's no way the child can be involved in that decision. So we're talking about euthanizing babies that someone doesn't want to deal with.
But that's if those babies have
babies are quote unquote disabled.
And severe disabilities, though.
So who defines what's severe? Who decides what's severe? The disabled person or someone else? I put this in context because of the T4 program in Germany, because of the cuts to disability at the same time these euthanasia laws are passed in Canada and the UK, because of the fact that the US uses not paying for people's health care as a way to dissuade people from receiving health care at all, itself is a form of passive euthanasia. So I'm tremendously uncomfortable with anything that lets other people make decisions for people who are considered to be of less capacity, because specifically of the autism awareness movement that empowers people like RFK Jr., which is largely driven by the parents of autistic children who believe their children are a burden that they shouldn't have to deal with.
Okay, interesting.
So when we have these euthanasia laws, I mean, there's going to be someone who agrees with somebody's parents that the fact that they're autistic is a good enough reason to euthanize them. It's going to happen. It's just a matter of time. And people say, well, these are slippery slope arguments. They're not slippery slope arguments. We see it happening.
It's interesting. Talk a bit more about your opposition to the British euthanasia one, which we were talk to us about that. So talk to us about those who are disabled who are against it, compared to others who say it is my choice. I don't like living with my chronic pain. I don't like living with my chronic severe schizophrenia, and I do want.
Well, when you look at a lot of these programs, how often is it actually a disabled person who is spearheading the Right to Die movement? There are specific disabled people who are used as court cases, but the leaders of the Right to Die movement are healthy people afraid of being disabled. People who think to themselves, well, if I weren't physically healthy, I wouldn't want to live. Mm-hmm. Or people who aren't seriously disabled who think if I were more disabled than I am, I might think about dying. But I also see lots of disabled people who want to live and just want more money from their benefits to help them live.
So then why can't that being said, why can't we chew gum and walk at the same time then? Why can't
because we don't live in a society that believes in walking and chewing gum at the same time. We live in a society that believes in hard binaries, where either the vaccine is perfect and no one ever gets sick because we get herd immunity immediately, or the only option is to just let it rip and let everybody die. Because that's the fastest way to herd immunity if the vaccine's no good.
Interesting. So, I mean, as an advocate, that's interesting, because as an advocate, as a socially liberal and economically leftist,
if you want to say on a private level,
but let me say this: that as somebody who is an advocate of euthanasia, as a socially liberal and economic leftist, I have to say your argument there is probably the best one I've heard from a leftist pushing back against it. I just wanted to say that.
Now, when we're coming on this whole, I don't think anybody should not have a right to kill themselves if they want to kill themselves. I don't know what ethically to think about suicide in general, but
that's a tricky one. That is a tricky one, though.
I mean, it's like, okay, capital punishment for suicide. I mean, that doesn't make any sense when you think about that. So at some point you have to really understand that if someone wants to kill themselves badly enough, they're going to find a way. And that if someone really believes that they have nothing to live for and that they want to die, then I guess they should have the right to make that choice. But I don't believe we should have a system that pushes people to make that choice. And when we pass euthanasia laws in an era of forced austerity, we're sending a clear message. We're making a choice to send a clear message. When we choose to pass euthanasia laws in an era of forced austerity, we're saying it's better for the economy if sick people die.
Interesting. Interesting.
Now that's where the whole Nazi shit started. It's better for the economy if sick people die. And once that was normalized, they went along with everything else. Because once parents were taking their disabled kids to the T4 program, they were going to be fine with anything.
Yeah.
And that's the whole thing. We are being desensitized to killing people.
But I'm curious. What's your? I'm curious. What's your thoughts on then the actions and the legacy of Dr. Jack Kevorkian? Because
I would rather not talk about Jack Kevorkian. I don't think there's really any meaningful discussion of his legacy at this point in time. If we ever get universal health care and a world where people aren't valued for their ability to produce money for someone else, then we can talk about Jack Kevorkian's legacy. But until we actually solve the whole capitalism problem, fuck the euthanasia question.
Interesting. Okay. Interesting.
Euthanasia under capitalism is an economic incentive for death.
What would you say to my argument? What would you say to my argument? And what would you say to this argument of mine, this pushback of mine, in which I guess my argument would sort of be like, why can't we chew gum and walk at the same time? And this is once again the left's inability to go beyond the issue of class and so forth.
Well, so let's just talk about historically speaking.
Okay.
In these historical periods of capitalist backlash against the black or the disabled or the queer, has capitalism ever walked and chewed gum at the same time? Or has it just killed the people it didn't like?
The latter.
There you go. That's my answer. Until we deal with the whole capitalism question, the question of walking and chewing gum at the same time on this issue is meaningless.
But doesn't that open the door for we can't have equal rights for queer people? We can't have equal rights for.
No, how does saying that we believe disabled people should have an equal right to life as everyone else take away from queer people's right to life the same as everybody else? It doesn't. See, that's the whole thing. We're saying everybody has a right to live.
Yes. Yeah.
And that you cannot use state machinery to incentivize death. Now, if you want to say on an ethical level that if someone privately comes to their doctor and says, help me die, and it's between them and their doctor in a closed, private situation with nobody else involved, okay, now we're starting to talk about something where, okay, they can make their decision. But we're not talking about that. We're talking about legalized, we're talking about publicly available programs that go hand in hand with cuts to the disability system. When people are actively cutting the disability system now, arguing for euthanasia laws is arguing for more disability cuts.
To which I would say, I don't want either of that. I don't want.
But you can't. But this doesn't happen in a vacuum. It doesn't happen in a vacuum. We would not be seeing the push for euthanasia if we were not also seeing the push for disability cuts. So the way that I would say it is, the people who are for both disability cuts and killing disabled people are walking and chewing gum at the same time. And we need to be pushing back against both disability cuts and euthanasia because of it. Now, I have a very, very hard time saying that people shouldn't have the right to die if they really want to. But at the same time, what are the social consequences of an unlimited right to die in a society where we're cutting people's disability. And we need to think about social consequences. It's not just individual liberties. We're not libertarians.
Indeed.
Individual liberties need to be considered because individual liberties are important. But when we're dealing with a question like, okay, where does the right to die start and end? There's not a simple and easy answer for that in a liberal democracy that pushes austerity.
Well, what sort of is going through my mind is I know you're an advocate. You're an advocate for sex work, and there's lots of great arguments to be anti-sex work.
But that's the whole thing. Is that
I have a comrade of mine who's anti-sex work, but is the greatest left, and is a great leftist when it comes to anti-imperialism and her advocacy of Haiti, and that's a very important anti-imperialist issue.
So what's her opinion? What's her opinion on the sex workers union in Belgium winning their right not to be forced into the brothel if they don't want to go?
That I can't.
So you see, that's the question you have to ask anti-sex work leftists to see if they're really pro-sex worker or not.
But I just want to say I can't answer that question because I've not asked her that question.
That's fair.
So, but Vince,
the reason I ask that is because I've seen people who claim to be really, really, really good leftists trash sex worker unions as if that's not going to do any good at all. But without sex worker unions, sex workers in Belgium wouldn't have the right to say, no, I want to go home. I don't want to work in the brothel today.
But Comrade Chris, I could say the exact same thing. And flip that in the euthanasia argument.
But that's the thing. If you want to make that argument, then I would say, you know what? Nobody. Now you have to take the no sex worker is deliberately choosing to put themselves in the horror situations that the diehard anti-sex work people describe. Sex workers do a great deal to try to avoid that, in fact. The anti-sex work movement has the same attitude towards sex work and sex workers that the anti-homeless movement has towards homeless people. They describe sex work as symptomatic of social problems, and they say we can solve the social problems by killing all the sex workers. Now, they don't put it in those terms. They pretty it up in all sorts of nice ways to make it sound like they want to save people. But in the end, does the anti-homeless movement do anything to help the homeless?
No.
The anti-sex worker movement in the end does not do anything to help sex workers. I'll give you the best example ever. Where is the program being run by all these diehard anti-sex work leftists giving women who want to get out of sex work jobs that pay them the same money and let them create their own schedule the same as sex work? Where's that program? Nobody has that program.
No, but I think they would say, and this is coming from me, who's agnostic on the issue. I'm still quite agnostic on the issue. I think they would say that capitalism itself creates the conditions for sex work. Ergo,
capitalism itself creates the conditions for.
Ergo, eradicate capitalism, and you won't have sex work.
Well, and that may or may not be true. And the only way we'll know is when we get there. But they're not saying eradicate capitalism and sex work would go away. They're saying eradicate sex work now under the conditions of capitalism.
Interesting. Gonna have to get
And they're pushing police state solutions to sex work. There is no sex workers organization that is not pushing some sort of police repression. There is no anti-sex work group that doesn't think cops are the solution. Now, they say they want to use the cops against Johns or pimps, but you had the conversation with Phoenix about who a pimp actually is under the law, right? When I had Phoenix on the show, did we have the conversation about who a pimp legally is?
I think so, but
women's husbands, sex workers' husbands have been sent to prison. Sex workers' boyfriends have been sent to prison. Sex workers' landlords have been sent to prison because they, quote unquote, receive money from a sex worker. Because that's all that being a pimp means legally. You receive money from a sex worker. So the definition of pimp as abusive trafficker that is pushed by the anti-sex work lobby is not the legal definition of a pimp. The legal definition of a pimp is anybody who receives money from a sex worker.
Interesting.
So when people say we want to crack down on pimps, they're not saying we want to crack down on abusive traffickers. They're saying we want to strip sex workers of their ability to participate in the economy.
Mm-hmm. But then going back to
my argument is if they want to convince me of their anti-sex work arguments, they need to find a way to make them pro-sex worker. And as long as what they actually do ends up being anti-worker, then they're anti-worker and not communist. And it's just that simple.
Interesting. But going back to euthanasia.
And not just that, but the most exploited workers. The industry that's so exploited, they say it shouldn't exist, but they're anti-worker. That's what pisses me off.
Well, I think sort of going back to euthanasia.
This isn't, I mean, I'll be honest. Yeah, going back, these aren't the best topics for us to engage on, precisely because I've heard most of the arguments of what they would say already. And the reason I feel so strongly about it is I have not been convinced at all. Because despite everything, nothing about the right to die movement or the anti-sex worker movement gives me any comfort that the people leading these movements care about the people being hurt by disability or sex work. What they hate is they hate the quote unquote social consequences of disability and sex work. Whereas most of the social consequences of sex work are the social consequences of capitalism. And most of the social consequences of disability are the social consequences of austerity.
And
for that matter, most of the sex workers are disabled in some way, and that's why they need a job that lets them make their own schedule.
No, but at the same time, what was I going to say?
If somebody wants to make the argument to me that sex work won't exist under socialism, then my response is, that's interesting. Maybe you're right. We'll wait and see. Because I don't know. What I do know is that there have been sexual predators in every socialist movement, whether that socialist movement was for or against helping sex workers. There have been bad actors in every socialist movement, whether that movement was for or against euthanasia. We're not gonna get around problems by taking such hard stances taking such hard abstract stances that we lose sight of the people involved. Because ultimately we're talking about communities. And when we're talking about sex workers, we're talking about a community of people. When we're talking about the disabled, we're talking about a community of people. The majority of people who are holding forth on the right to die and anti-sex work are healthy people who aren't sex workers. And that makes me suspicious.
But at the same time, you have some ex-sex workers who were victims of human trafficking who
You
are
have some ex-trafficked people. You have some former trafficked people who have accepted the arguments of the anti-trafficking crowd about sex work. That is not the same. And sex workers will tell you that there is a division between trafficked people and sex workers. And it's an important division because trafficked people need help, not legal persecution. Because let's remember that anti-trafficking laws always seem to hurt the trafficked person the most. Yeah. And the anti-trafficking people don't have an answer to that. Mm-hmm. They just want to push their more cops are the solution to the social problems of sex work.
But I think this conversation and I don't mean this as an insult.
Oh, I know.
But I think this conversation, I think it proves that even the best of the left does have socially conservative blind spots.
Well, I think this is true.
Which is why
it's normal. It's normal to be socially conservative in the West. Even more so, it's normal to be fascist up to a certain point in the West. This is why people in the West are able to go about their business while things happen in Gaza and Congo and Somalia. Because everybody's a little fascist. And that's one of the things we have to work on first. And one of the first ways that we deal with the everybody is a little fascist problem is we take firm positions against fascism, which means taking firm positions against the social conservatism itself.
But at the same time, and not just in the West. Like if you go to a place, like if you go to Latin America,
Latin America is part of the West. We can say it's part of the global South because it is, but Latin America is also part of the West.
You're policing too much the language, but if you go to certain countries which have had socialist governments and so forth like that, who have done great social justice policies, but they still continue the drug war, which
is Nazism in action.
Yeah. So
and
the people on the left who are great on who you would say great on a lot of issues, but I do not agree with them on the sex work. I would say that they themselves have a very socially conservative blind spot when it comes to their anti-sex stuff. And I would say
well, I mean, so wealth consciousness, because class consciousness
in Asia also have a very socially conservative blind spots.
Well, I mean, the U.S.
Which is why I always say,
the U.S. specifically, it's important to understand.
Fucking gum and walk at the same time.
Which is, if you look at the United States is a country that was founded by religious whack jobs who agreed to start a colony to make English capitalists money.
Yes.
Think about that. Canada was founded so that England could strip mine the mountains in North America. South Africa was founded because gold and diamonds. I mean, you look at the West and it's like, I mean, we're not the good guys.
Yeah,
and you know, I will also say that since you mentioned Latin America,
and that I agree with you at 110%.
And since you mentioned,
but that being said, thank you for this conversation on euthanasia because I have found it very enlightening. I'm still
on a private level. On a private level, there should be no problem with it. And the fact that there is a problem with it on a private level is the other side of social conservatism. You can't go to hell. And, you know, it's this the core the core of class conflict is that the petty bourgeois, what we in the West call the middle class, using very artificial and inaccurate language, the petty bourgeois believes that the problem of evil in the world is not the power of the wealthy, but the idleness of the poor. And so the petty bourgeois seeks to solve society's problems by uplifting the poor, whether they want to be uplifted or not, instead of breaking the power of the wealthy. And this is what all of this.
In fact, that's why it was shocking when we did the whole program about liberalism and so forth, when you said it was the Liberal Party of England that passed the poor laws, the Victorian, Dickensian,
it was the Liberal Party of England that passed the treadmill, with the treadmill being that you had to work yourself till you could not even stand because you were so tired in order to get a piddling welfare check from the British government. Now imagine being a disabled person and having to walk the treadmill for your disability check.
Yeah.
And so yes, this is liberalism, the idea that you should help the poor but uplift them at the same time. And this uplifting always has some Nazi.
And what are liberals? But two things. The soft example, I like to say that liberals are compassionate conservatives. And the other level is liberals are just fascists with good table manners.
Well, the liberal is the guy who thinks we should all be able to agree that fascism is the best way.
Centrism at its best.
And that's really what it comes down to. And I think we're coming up on 2 hours, so this is a good time to wrap up, since we're also starting to get a little off topic. But we did a good job of staying on topic too, for the most part.
Yeah. No. But this was a fascinating conversation, and it's definitely one that's going to be on my mind for the next several weeks, most likely the next several months, because you've done a very good job challenging. No, you've done a very good job challenging me, getting me exposed to ideas I never thought, and this is why I love being the kind of journalist I am, and getting into the kind of topics that we get into, because it's so. Like I said, it's been very fascinating.
Well, I really wanted to talk about. I also think that it's important to consider the push for euthanasia now, so soon after COVID. And to keep that in mind.
Yeah.
Regardless of what your position is on the private right to die of an individual, I think it's worth asking, why is this push happening now?
Yeah.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Do you have any final thoughts?
There's a book there's a book I actually want to fantastic. I found it. Since we talked about the rights of disabled people and how their rights are the ones that get trampled on the most when we have ideas like the shock doctrine, austerity, and whatnot, I just want to plug a book. This is done by Frances Ryan herself, a disabled journalist. Folks should get the book "Crippled: Austerity and the Demonization of Disabled People," and it looks specifically at Brits.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I wanted to say, I mean, a whole lot of things can be explained, and I hate to say it, but a whole lot of government policies in the West and the global North can be explained by, well, Westerners hate black people and disabled people.
Yeah.
I mean, Paul Kagame is Bill Gates' favorite dictator because of his ability to help Bill Gates kill the bad black people.
and how people I just said this to Ann Garrison the other day, how people can defend Paul Kagame and what he's doing to Congo, which has done absolutely nothing.
In fact, they helped him. They helped him. The Congo, it was the Congo that gave, it was the Congo and Uganda that gave the Tutsi rebels safe haven. So he's talking over somebody who helped him.
And I say supposedly rebels because Paul Kagame was the guy who shot down the stuff. He is the real genocidaire. He's the real ethno-nationalist.
He has, I mean,
the
so
West.
it is worth noting. It is worth noting that there is also a strong school of thought that really has to be looked at closely too, that says that there was an element of the Hutu government who kind of agreed with Paul Kagame that this peace treaty that the president of Rwanda was negotiating with the rebels was a bad thing, and that more war would be better. And that was their whole rationale for the genocide. More war would be better. I mean, you can make an argument that Kagame shot the president down. You can make an argument that the Hutu right-wingers shot the president down. And you can make an argument that Kagame was secretly in on it with the Hutu right-wingers, and they all did it together. And you would never know because the evidence is so ambivalent.
But he is Satan incarnate, and folks mobilize and join Friends of the Congo. But just want to say in closing, yes, folks, do get the book "Crippled: Austerity and the Demonization of Disabled People" by Francis Ryan. And well, Chris, you can close. You can close us out. So check me out at 1+1. And again, this is a fascinating conversation. This is why I always happily accept invitations to come on the Eclectic Radical. The Radical.
Yes,
Eclectic.
please check Youri Smouter's channel 1+1 out. Of course, this channel is Eclectic Radical on YouTube. You can follow me on Eclectic Radical on Twitter, which is still where I'm most active. I am also on Blue Sky. I am trying to be more active. If you engage with me, I will engage with you back on Blue Sky. It's just I'm still getting used to the way engagement on Blue Sky works, and it can be hard motivating myself to stay active some days.
Likewise.
If you want to support the show, the Patreon is Eclectic Radical. If you want to make a one-time donation, the cash is Eclectic Radical. The Substack is Eclectic Radical if you want to be on the mailing list. I try to keep it simple for everybody. Thank you again for joining us. I hope you enjoyed our conversation, and we will tweet at you.
Peace.